Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Peep into Education. Today's special guest I have with me, Brittany Carey, who's coming from San Diego, California. And Brittany is a preschool teacher, a family care provider, a consultant in education, and she really focuses on advocacy and social justice in education. And so I'm really excited. Brittany had connected with me through Instagram, and we kind of did a podcast swap. And so I was very happy to be on Brittany's podcast, which will be airing on a separate date, and then and vice versa. Now she's with us here. And so on our episode tonight, we're going to go over some topics, including exclusionary discipline practices and how to foster holistic inclusion in education, and just some other things that kind of come out of our conversation per usual, because we tend to get off on some other fun topics. So I'm going to let Brittany introduce herself, and then we'll get going into our conversation today.
Absolutely. First of all, Kylie, thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yes.
It's so strange to be on this side of the, the podcasting screen.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm so excited to be here. But yeah, I'm Brittany. I come from a background as an early childhood educator, and now I'm an education consultant at Conscious Pathways. I love education, advocacy, social justice, really advocating for holistic early childhood development. That's just my love, and I love talking about it, and just excited to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
As we talked a lot in these last couple of weeks, and me and you very much are in very similar paths and kind of fields within education, especially around like cultural responsiveness and just some common things that we talk about. So again, I know we can get real long, but I think we're going to get to the point today of some stuff that we want to talk about. And so I want to start before we get into our actual topics of conversation. Just share with us, how did Brittany get from where she is now, like where I guess in the past, like what led you into this career in around early childhood and inclusion practices and all the things that you did?
Absolutely. I'll try to condense this into a smaller story so I don't take up the entire however long we're talking about this. But I actually knew I wanted to be a teacher in the third grade. So I really struggled with school in my younger years. I struggled learning how to read. We moved a lot. My mom was a single parent. And she had me and my brother, and we moved from California all the way to the East Coast. And so, I just really struggled with just school. I struggled with learning how to read, and I almost didn't make it past the second grade. They wanted to hold me back, but they decided to actually push me forward into the third grade. And I was one of the lowest readers in the entire class. But luckily, I had a really wonderful third grade teacher, and she took the time to actually work with me. She would stay with me after class and find books that I was interested in reading. She would take me to the library at school and show me different things within the library, different books that I might be interested in. So I loved animals, but I really loved dogs. Like I wanted a dog so bad when I was a kid. And so she found books that were just related to dogs and animals. And I just remember like that was the first time that I really connected with reading, and the first time that I really had an adult connecting with me in that way. And it was so special. It was a very special moment in my young life. And so I decided after that, I want to be this person for other students. I want other kids to have this experience and feel this way too. And so I decided in third grade, I wanted to grow up and I wanted to be a teacher. By the end of the third grade, I was one of the top readers in my class. I was really excelling in academics. I was, socially excelling. Like everything was really going well because I had a really great teacher who connected with me and bonded with me. And that was so important, especially in that point in my, early childhood, development. I got a little derailed because I don't remember who it was, but someone told me like, you don't want to be a teacher. Like they don't make any money. And they're not wrong, but so I decided like, okay, what's important is making money. So I was like, maybe I'll be a lawyer, maybe I'll be a doctor, maybe I'll just do one of these things that makes a lot of money. And so I wanted to be a doctor. So when I originally started going to school, I was doing kind of pre-med. So I wanted to go to medical school and I wanted to be a neonatologist. I wanted to work on really little tiny babies.
Yeah.
And as I was doing all of that, I've been working in, the customer service field. I've been working in, restaurants, serving, working at bars, and was getting real tired of that. So
I've been
I
there.
wanted to do something a little bit different. Yeah, right. The money was fine, but I was like, I've been doing this for a long time and I'm tired. So my friend told me, you should get into preschool teaching. Like, I think you'd be really good at it. And so I was like, okay, started looking into it. I applied, really in just a backwards way. I applied to a school without really even having the education that I needed to work there. But she was like, it's fine. Like, we can hire you. All you have to do is make sure that you're enrolled in the classes that you need to take to be qualified in California to teach preschool, which in California, it's only 12 units, which that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
But you just need those 12 units in California to teach preschool. I started teaching preschool the first day. It was a complete hot mess, but I loved it. It was the best thing. I got to work with the kids. The kids really made a big impact on me, and I truly loved it. So much so that it really just shifted my career path completely.
Yeah.
I was like, no, I don't want to go pre-med anymore. I want to be a teacher. And so I decided I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. So that was like where my heart and soul was. I was like, I'm going to teach kindergarten. And so in the meantime, I kept teaching preschool. And the more I learned about child development, especially early childhood, how important those first 5 years are in a child's life and development, that also kind of shifted a lot of things in me. Like, why was I not thinking of early childhood as, a complete job in itself? I kind of was like, well, I have to be a kindergarten teacher, so I'm a real teacher, right? Mm-hmm. And so I started kind of thinking about that concept of like, well, why is this not a real teaching job, right? Why do we not get the same benefits? Why don't we get like at least slightly better pay?
Right.
Like, why aren't we getting at least making what K through 12 educators are making, which again, understandable. It's not much.
Yeah.
But looking at all of those things and, I kind of shifted again into advocacy and social justice within education just after I saw a lot of the issues that were happening. I had learned in one of my classes that by kindergarten, we were expecting children to know how to read or to be on their reading journey already. But when I know and look at brain development and I look at early childhood and what's developmentally appropriate, I'm seeing that doesn't sound right. There's a disconnect there. And I knew that I could not be in the classroom teaching something that I knew was not developmentally appropriate for my students. And so took that shift and went into advocacy, social justice. That's what my bachelor's was in. And then I really got into the school to prison pipeline, exclusionary discipline practices, and just really understanding why does this happen? Where does this come from? The history in this country and education. And so that really started my activism and advocate journey. I got my master's in legal studies and really looking at how education and our legal system intersect and like how policies intersect and really looking deep into that.
Yeah.
And my thesis was actually on juvenile adjudication in adult criminal court. So looking at how basically children can be tried in an adult criminal court and then be processed in criminal court instead of the juvenile court, which is what was made for them, right?
Yeah.
And so looking at how this happens, so you can have, children as young as 13 years old being tried in an adult criminal court that's not made for them, right? And being in, the prison industrial complex at 13 years old.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're not setting them up for success.
Not at all.
So that's really what got me here. I started Conscious Pathways to consult on these things and to train educators and to work with child development and really do advocacy work around the school to prison pipeline, and particularly the preschool to prison pipeline and exclusionary discipline and punitive practices and all of those things.
Wow, thank you so much. Sorry, I'm like writing notes down. I'm a note taker, so I think I always have to remind people I'm not being rude. I'm just writing down all the things. So much things. Thank you, first of all, for all of the work that you're doing in that world of education, and just taking a different stance through the lens of education, and really kind of sticking up and not kind of like you're sticking up and advocating for the things that are needed. And you talked on so many different things that I know that we're gonna get into. And I think where I want to start is like, as somebody who covers early childhood education pathway courses for our high school students who are interested in that field. Right. And as somebody who taught that, and as a mother, of two children, those developmental stages are crucial and super important
Yes.
for the growth of our children. And in relation to education and kind of what's happening in like certain trends, that we're seeing around literacy. This was something that we talked about in our other podcasts, and, around literacy, just around, I'm glad that you noticed like the age appropriate, situation, that what the expectation is for our students in some levels can be either way too high or way too low. And it's very interesting to come from that approach of, teaching preschoolers, and recognizing that it's, it's not age appropriate in whatever ways that it was. And I taught one of my earliest experiences with actually being in the class teaching in a K-12 school was kindergarten. And and this was my daughter. Yeah, my daughter she's probably about 1 at the time. And so about 9 years ago, right? So teaching kindergarten, and you do get a very like wide eye like view of like, wow, this is what children are like, and this is what they do know how to do, and this is what they don't know how to do. And some of these kids will blow you away, like amazing. Some of these kids you're very, very concerned, and you can tell and see that. And so I guess my question with your experience, especially working with currently like in the preschools, I like to talk data and numbers and like all of those things. And I know the literacy crisis that we're in the United States. Somebody says this is an illiteracy crisis. It's not that they're literate, they're illiterate. And I was like, that's a good point. But again, stating for those who haven't seen the other podcasts is that currently we're in the 30s to 40% of proficient, either third or fourth grade for our students. And we talked a lot about that stemming a lot from pandemic and catching back up. But we were not far behind in those numbers anyways. They were already pretty low pre-pandemic. And so my question to you, as somebody who's working with these preschool students, and who does a lot of literacy and phonetic, like the very early foundations of reading skills, like what does that look like in 2024, and maybe some things that you've noticed, good or bad, about even your current groups of students, like where are the struggles, and what are some things that you're doing to remediate some of these issues around literacy?
Yes. So one of the first things that's coming to mind when you ask that question is early childhood is such a vital part of a child's just learning, growth, and development, right? Those first 5 years, a lot of their brain is going through a lot of changes. It's going through a lot of development. It's going to grow into its basically final size. It's still developing after that for a long time after that, but it grows into its final size. Like that's as big as our brain is going to get. And that's a lot of growing that happens in those first 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the first things I'm thinking about is how important it is to have early intervention, like in early childhood. And that's another reason why it's so important that as early childhood educators, we understand the developmental milestones. And so while we understand that development happens in a bit of a continuum, it's not super linear for every single child. And just because two children are the same age doesn't mean that they're going to be at the same exact developmental stage, right? So we can kind of think of development in the milestones as more of like a range. So, we know that within this range, within this time phrase, we can expect a child to do XYZ, depending on the domain. So in early childhood, and probably education in general, we have the classic domains: social emotional learning, cognitive, language skills, physical development. That includes your gross motor and your fine motor skills. And so it's really important that we understand that one, development happens within that range. So this is a normal range that we can expect children will, develop their pincer grasp, right?
Right.
And that can happen. There's a couple months of give way in between that, right? But if we're noticing that that pincer grasp is not improving, or it's not where we can generally expect it to be for a child of this age, that tells us that, we might need to be investigating something, right? There might be additional services that we can start providing to support that child in their learning, growth, and development.
Yeah.
And so getting early intervention is so important because it gives students the tools, it gives them the support, it gives the families the tools and the support that they need to be successful in these things. And it can be hard in early childhood because, again, that range, it can be different for every child.
Right.
But as educators, it's so important that we know where children should be in terms of like their development and how to advocate for, you know what, I'm seeing some behaviors that are a little bit outside the norm for this developmental stage. I'm seeing some, developmental kind of abnormalities, like, you have a 3-year-old in your classroom who's not saying more than 2 words. That's something that we need to be a little concerned about. Right. And so in terms of reading and language and development, it's going to be really hard to learn phonics if you're not hearing the words correctly, right? Yeah. So if it's not connecting, if you're not hearing the words correctly, it's going to be really hard to say them. It's going to be really hard to learn them. And it's going to really be hard to learn how to read because you're not fully connecting those things, right?
Right.
Same thing with reading and writing. If you haven't developed the fine motor skills to do the writing yet, you're not going to be prepared, within kindergarten to do that. And so again, that's why early intervention is so important. Yes. And I think there's a lot of students who have undiagnosed learning disabilities. Sorry, that's my dog. He's also passionate about reading. But that's why it's so important that, we do early intervention and that, students are getting the services that they need so that they can harness these skills a little bit later. We know that when it comes to like reading and literacy, especially in early childhood, reading to a child, because reading is such a difficult thing to teach. It's a difficult thing to learn because that's not how our brains operate. Our brains are working towards, storytelling. Our brain loves visual storytelling, right? Our brain loves to hear things, but this idea of reading, it's a whole new skill, a whole new part of your brain that you have to like work and use in order to do that. So some people think that, I read to my child every day, so they should be able to read now. Or you'll have people who say, my child can read this book and he's only 2 years old. And I always like to point out there's a difference between memorizing words and cadence and actually reading and synthesizing and understanding what you are reading. Those are 2 different things, right? It's great that your child has memorized the book. Awesome.
Yeah.
That has nothing to do with reading.
Right.
So it is still important to read with children because it develops social emotional skills. It develops their story understanding, their listening skills, their receptive language skills, their expressive language. There's so much that comes with that. So I still advocate for reading to children at any possibility that you can.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to actual reading, that's not it, right? There's so much more that goes into actually learning to read than that. But what we can do is, again, we can read to children, and what we can do is cultivate a love for reading. So as you said before, we have a problem right now, especially in the US, where people are a lot of people are functionally illiterate, meaning like they just cannot read.
Yeah.
People are also illiterate, which means like they know how to read, but they choose not to read.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we lose our love for reading. We lose our enthusiasm for reading really early. And so in early childhood, we can help develop that excitement for reading and love for reading and enjoyment in reading so that when it comes to learning how to read, this isn't a chore that you're making them do now. It's, I already love books. I already love interacting with this thing. Of course, I want to learn more about how to do it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
In early childhood, those are I'd say the top 2 things that we're doing. We're fostering that love for learning and also understanding developmentally where we can expect children to be within that range, and then recommending, whether they get screenings and services. Obviously, we're not diagnosticians, we'll leave that to those professionals, but we're interacting with these children at this prime time where we can say, this isn't where I can expect you to be, and let's get you some services so that you can be supported.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. And you again made some really great points there. And kind of just thinking even personally for my son. So again, this is why it's important that your schools or that you as a parent are asking if your schools are doing vision screenings, hearing screenings, and if your child does have any type of speech impediment and they can't say certain things or not vocal or speaking by a certain age, like that's also important because again, it does go into any type of reading and literacy skills because you need all of these pieces, right? You don't have to be able to hear to read, but you still need those things to support you. But we need to understand if your student can't do one of these things or don't have any of these types of sensory skills or abilities because it does at the end affect them. And so my son, who has a speech impediment with speaking, but he has nothing wrong with his hearing and vision is fine, but it took a while to, understand him and for even him reading things out loud, that becomes a struggle. And in kids like this, and I've experienced with my son where he kind of gets discouraged to read aloud, and so all of those things like really affect our kids. So I just want to leave that there. Like it's very important, and if you have a concern, and this is where that advocacy side comes and your rights as a parent or a guardian, like if you have a concern for your child, the earliest that you notice it, the earlier you need to say something. Don't wait till these kids get a bad test score, like don't in third grade, like we don't want to wait that long. And I love that
and
again you're
keep
making
advocating,
yes, that's the
keep
part.
advocating, because
Keep
sometimes you'll bring it up and professional might not see it yet, but you might see it.
Yeah.
And so keep advocating
Yeah.
for the testings, keep advocating for your child. At the end of the day, you're going to know your child best.
Yes.
So just keep advocating until you get what your child needs.
Yeah. And another component too, and I feel like I've just this topic has been huge for a lot of my conversations lately is, really just as a parent or guardian, as well as a teacher, initiating that love for learning and reading. And I know it's very difficult, but there's so many ways that we can do it, and so many ways that we can do it even passively. And I even speak on like, okay, if you're going to allow your kids to be on YouTube, do you at least have the closed captions on where they're seeing the words, so they can read with it, and kind of identifying, that's more older functioning students. But if if you have these littles and they're on when we're talking about technology, and don't just rely on technology to teach these kids, use traditional pen to paper and get them writing. And the biggest piece is the phonetics, is do they understand the letter sound, the letter name, what they make, the shape it makes within your mouth to form the letters, the right placement of the tongue, right? That can be a lot for parents when you don't really think about the actual usage of your mouth. And as somebody who, when I went to school for music and for vocal music, and we had to take a bunch of diction courses and learn, what all the things in the mouth does in relation to speaking and reading. And it's such a science that people just very passively think about it. And so this also kind of ties into the importance of dual language students and why they need to be able to understand phonetics, even if they're translating from Spanish to English, that can help their reading fluency a lot better. So definitely some super important stuff there. And I definitely agree with what you're saying. The earlier the intervention, the better, because there should be no reason that we're seeing such low testing scores if these things are taken care of in kindergarten, first and second grade. There's 3 years of, okay, nobody noticed this about the student in 3 years. Like that's a little scary. And so kind of backtracking a little bit, and no shade to anything, but talking about how in California it only takes you 12 units to teach preschool, but then it's considering what are in, and you can speak on that if you'd like or not, but what does that include? So does it include learning like phonetics and proper like reading techniques and literacy skills? Yeah, no,
Not quite.
not quite.
No. For early childhood, so in California, your early childhood development, that's usually pre-K. So that's generally teaching by about 2.5, 2.9 months, right? So teaching between 2 to 5 year olds. And then in order to teach kindergarten and up, then you would need your multi-subject teaching credential, and then you need to go get certified. And so that's a whole other conversation. And then for transitional kindergarten in California that we've had it for a while, but we've shifted it now. So transitional kindergarten now encompasses all 4 year olds. Before it encompassed kind of older-ish 4 year olds in between, like a very small kind of bracket in which kids could be qualified for transitional kindergarten, which was basically a free year of pre-kindergarten, right? Within the school district. And so to teach TK now, you also need a multi-subject teaching credential and like kind of early childhood certification in order to teach that. Which has been a little bit controversial just because that's an age range that early childhood educators have been teaching for so long. And so now they've essentially been boxed out of this thing that they've been doing for years. And when you look at it, although for California, our standards are, I still think it's pretty low. But then when you look from the statewide perspective, in some states, you only need a high school diploma to teach preschool. Which is super alarming. The 12 units was alarming enough, but our 12 units, you take human growth and development, you take child, family, community, you take nutrition, and then you have the choice of a couple of curriculum classes that you can take. So it does cover your basic development things. Obviously, the more you know, especially when it comes to development, the better you can teach and the more that you can do things. But I say that because across the nation, early childhood educators are actually incredibly educated in this field. So a lot of teachers within our field have bachelor's degrees, and a good portion of them have master's degrees in early childhood education. So our workforce is actually extremely educated, but are still some of the lowest paid educators nationwide across the country. It's like, $15 an hour, if that. Right. If that. Sometimes even lower. And so that's a whole problem within itself. But
definitely
to answer your original question, yes, it's 12.
Yes. And so and I'm like over here thinking, I'm like, so when do we actually like what in what type, say if we're looking at an educator prep, right, and somebody who knows that they want to go into even teaching kindergarten, and even for our early elementary teachers, and I'm trying to visualize if I've ever seen a scope and sequence or a sequence of courses that included specifically understanding phonics and reading literacy. And I know there's a lot, but a lot of, and now that I'm like thinking, I'm like, wow, there really isn't any in-depth level of phonics and literacy, just like even focusing on one class, like for all this class, if you're teaching at least elementary, because we know we're focusing on reading, a heavy reading skills, are you getting like hounded with these are like what you need to do, like what I did in my music program to learn, I can fluently read Spanish, French, German, Italian, because I learned how to phonetically read the sounds and what those sounds make in those languages. And I'm thinking like, is there something like that? And now I got to go back and do some research. And I think that's, that would be something to kind of pull together. So if you guys are watching, if you know of that in your program, if you know that is a big key focus, but I think that is something that may be lost, especially within an educator preparatory, or when we're going to school to be an educator through higher education. But to the same sentiment, if you are somebody who's entering the profession without an education background, then when do you actually get those in-depth levels of professional development on proper skills to teach literacy and phonics to these students? And I think that is a big key piece that we're missing. Sometimes it's missed. You talk a lot too about on your channel about high quality professional development. And
Yes.
so we don't have to stick onto the literacy topic, but obviously, professional development is a huge thing, and or even the programming that we're taking in college. And so what are some other things that you talk about within high quality professional development, and what are your ideas of what that looks like?
Yeah, of course. So I think sometimes when people hear, professional developments or PDs, their stomach kind of sinks a little bit because, it's been kind of boring. It's been kind of like corporate or boring. And especially, if you're in K through 12 education, very rarely is it tailored to the exact thing that you teach. And so that becomes a problem, right? So if you're already coming into the professional development, you're like, oh my God, this again. That makes it really, really hard. So sorry.
It's okay.
Oh God,
I need you.
Yeah, I know. He's just really excited. I think my partner might be home, so maybe that's what he's screaming about right now. Okay, I think he's done. Fingers crossed. Anyways. Sorry, my partner's coming through the door, so I think that's why he's screaming. Okay, I think he's calm now. Okay, anyways. So for professional development, I think what really makes it high quality is one, tailoring it to exactly what the educators are needing and seeking. So when I do professional development, it's usually around topics of social justice, exclusionary discipline practices, and even just, child development in general. And I think it's really important that it's, as a facilitator, I want to show the educators or the leaders that I'm talking to, I want to show them what it looks like and feels like to practice whatever it is I'm teaching in the classroom. I want them to experience what that is like, right? Because I can't expect you to go out there and, do developmentally appropriate practices. I can't expect you to go out there and practice anti-bias and practice culturally responsive teaching if I myself have not shown you what that looks like.
Yeah.
And another big element to that is sometimes we think of professional development. It's like, oh, I'll bring you in for about an hour and you'll talk to them. And then they are now completely proficient in the thing that you've taught them in. And they're going to go out and do it perfectly every time.
Yeah.
And that's just not how humans learn.
Right.
That's just not how the world works, essentially. And so you need you need hands-on practice with the thing.
Yeah.
You need to be, consistently coached throughout the thing that you're trying to learn and master. And that means that you need multiple touch points, right? So it's not just a training that you come in and do. So like I have a series that I do called Reimagine Education. And it's a 4-part series. So I talk about, education, social justice, advocacy, empowerment, and equity are the kind of 4 parts of it. And the purpose of that is to kind of do some space in between each training. So I'll do one training maybe in the fall, and then, I can do some coaching in between there, but I'm not going to come back and do another full training until the spring. And so that means that you're having time to practice what I've shown you and what we've talked about. And it's very interactive. My job as kind of facilitator isn't just to stand in front of you and talk to you for 2 hours and then be like, okay, here's your certificate. Go home now.
Yeah.
My job as a facilitator is actually to ask you questions to get you deeply learning about the topic and get you talking to your peers, to get you actually like thinking about what is going on and these deeper questions and kind of breaking down our understanding of education, the education system, right? And then, we coach throughout that process and they come back in the spring, we do a little review, we check in, how are things going? What are you struggling with? What are you working? Like, how are things going when you're practicing that one thing that we went over before we go into the next thing that we do? I think that's a big thing about having quality professional development is that it's not just a one and done thing.
Right.
It's not just a 1-hour training. And yes, that means we have to take more time to do the thing, but that's what it takes for people to learn.
Yes.
Right. So we're catering to how people learn. We don't do that in college where we just every class is one hour long and now you've gotten your degree and you've been to school for your month and you're like, yep, you did it. Like that's not we recognize in a lot of settings in a lot of ways that that's not how people learn. So why would we expect people to be able to do that within a professional development setting?
Right. Exactly.
So again, showing people exactly what it is that you want them to do, and having them experience it, and having them, do deeper learning, have conversations about it, really get interactive with them. And I'm an introverted person, so when I go to trainings and they're like, okay, you're gonna get up and you're gonna talk to your peers, I'm like, no,
I don't want to.
I don't want to, just tell me the things. But when it's a really thoughtfully done activity, and at the end of it, I'm saying, wow, I'm really happy that we did that. Like, if you can make the introverted person feel like, wow, I'm really happy with how that social interaction went.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing. You want to cater to all the learning styles. Again, just as we want to do that in our classrooms, we want to see that in our classrooms, because no brain is going to be the same. Everybody's brain is going to learn differently, especially when you have neurodivergencies in the classroom. So things like autism show up differently person to person, right? Things like OCD shows up differently from person to person. And there's natural variances in that. And so we want to cater to the diverse learning styles that we have present in our classroom or present in our professional development room. So whether that's visual learning, auditory learning, whether they need to be hands-on doing stuff, right? How are their senses interacting? All of those things are super important. I recently learned that I'm a very visual learner. I knew this, but it finally dawned on me, you can't tell me directions, because it will just go in one ear and out the other. I'm just barely listening. I'm like, don't tell me that. I need to see it. Give me the maps.
Yeah.
I need to see where we're going. I need to know when the turn is coming. I need that. Don't tell me. I don't want to hear that.
Yeah. And you make such such a great point, and I think it can go back both ways. Like, us as adults, we expect certain things out of students, but but when the roles are reversed, can adult to adult, do we do, what are our expectations, and how are we teaching things to our peers? And even though they're our peers and we're the same age, or the similar, whatever, in the same roles, we forget, like you said, that people have multiple learning styles. Me personally, I'm a tactile, kinesthetic. This is why I write things down. I hear you saying all these things, but I'm like, if I don't write it down, I'll probably forget in 5 seconds what you just told me, because there's so much stuff in my head. But I'm more too along the lines of visual. I've had this really weird visual, what do you call it, picture memory, photographic memory, where if I'm in a place and I'm driving around and I'm like, wait, I know where I'm at, right? That way, and I don't get lost, even if it's my first time visiting and kind of coming back. But that's how it is for me for writing. And if I'm writing things down, and I recall physically writing it and seeing that I wrote it down and read it back to myself, I'm always like, I know I wrote it down. Where is it? And so now I'm going through five different books, because I'm like, I have this information. I can visually see me writing this. And so that's so let me not get off there, but the importance, I love how you saying, it's not a one and done. And I think that in the world of professional development, it's kind of like another thing of, are we just checking the box that we got it done? And even in excuse me, in relation to teacher certificates, in a lot of places, if they don't come with an educational background, they'll do complete professional development to cover what they call deficiencies. In a lot of states, it's basically yeah, you don't have this education background, but if you take these PDs within the next few years, you're good to go. But what is the follow-up of that? Obviously the teacher needs to be able to demonstrate that they've learned, or understanding the content that they got in that professional development. But is there really high accountability for that specific PD, that it's being applied? Or is it really important, or are you just checking a box? And so, excuse me, as somebody who puts on professional development for an entire state, in career and technical education, I sit there and think, okay, how do I want to approach this? Similar, if you were teaching, how do you approach this with your students, and what is going to be the best way for them, one, to retain the information? Are you appealing to the different levels of types of learners, the visual, audio, kinesthetic, and then are you actually modeling what you want them to do and giving them some type
Yes.
of follow-up action item? Like, don't just be like, yeah, here you
Yep.
go. Have a good day. Like, it was nice meeting you.
Mhm.
Then it's like, okay. I kind of think about that with CPR, like how you can do CPR lessons
Yeah.
online. Like, wait, you don't
Mhm.
practice like on anything, but I'm like, so if this was really to happen in real life, like, are you really
Mhm.
going to know what to do? So I kind of like think of things like that, and I think
Yeah.
that's a great, like you said, a topic of that. And so within your, you have, with your consulting, you offer professional development in what types of
Mhm.
areas do you do that for your business?
Yeah. So the thing that I mostly teach on in professional development wise is social justice. And so really getting really specific on what that means in education. So around equity, what is justice, restorative justice practices is another training that I do, culturally responsive, relevant and sustaining pedagogy is another thing that I can talk on. And just really all those alternatives to exclusionary discipline. So that's really what my organization is founded on, is looking at alternatives to exclusionary discipline for students. So
Yeah.
recognizing that that is a problem, recognizing that it comes from systemic reasons. So
Yeah.
the system is made the way it is, and it is made to be it operates exactly the way it's supposed to operate in
Yeah.
a lot of ways.
Yep.
And so recognizing that one of the tiers of that is that it is systemic. So that means that we do need to be working on policy work. We need to be working on research in order to really see the change that we want to see.
Yeah.
So that's one area that I do focus on. And then the other area is then, okay, so if we have adults in the room, the educators in the room, right, knowing that the system is flawed, the system is the way it is. And as we work on making the system better, we also have to work on making the now better, right? Because these
Right.
kids, they're in it
Yes.
right now.
Yes,
So what
absolutely.
strategies can we use to keep students in schools, to make sure that schools are a safe, holistically enjoyable place for students to be, for teachers to be? And how are we really valuing our educators? How are we valuing, and maintaining their humanity within education? So it's kind of this fully holistic approach, right? From
Yeah.
the students to the teachers to the community, the parents and the caregivers, and also looking at, historically what's been happening, this, systemically what's happening, and really incorporating all of these aspects in there. So,
Yeah.
one, I might be advocating to public policy members. Right now I'm in the public policy committee of our, local San
Nice.
Diego Planning Council and Development. And so that's one way that I'm getting like kind of politically involved and just making sure that the policies that we're enacting, especially in early childhood, that it is trauma informed, that it is collectivist, that it is looking out for the best interest and it's developmentally appropriate.
Right.
And then looking at our leaders within education, so our directors, our principals, our superintendents, who, how are you kind of making a school environment or a school community that is holistic, that is authentic, that, encourages, teachers and students to show up as their fully authentic selves?
Right.
How are we supporting educators, right? Again, I can't just give you information and give you this data and then expect you to go out there and now you are a completely anti-biased educator who will never, exclusionary discipline a child ever,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like there's some things that we got to do. There's some things we got to, like, there's internal things we got to break down. I
Right.
need you to see what it feels like for your culture and for your existence to be affirmed and valued. And once you are able to do that, you're able to really see the humanity and the value in others, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so really a lot of my trainings focus on that. They focus on the culture, identity. I talk a lot about identity. And then once we do that, so I don't get into like the thick, juicy, good stuff
Yeah.
yet. I always start with, who are you?
Right.
Why are you here?
Right.
Why does our identity matter? And how do we connect with each other
Right.
by both honoring my identity and honoring
Mm-hmm.
your identity and what you bring to the table as well?
Yeah.
Then we can start getting into the social justice pedagogy.
Yeah.
Then we can start getting into systems of oppression. We can
Mm-hmm.
start getting into prejudice. We can start getting
Mm-hmm.
into privilege, right?
Yeah.
Because we've already broken down some of those barriers to get to this point.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into those more practical strategies of like, okay, now that you understand what systems are in place that cause these things to happen, you
Yeah.
understand who I am as a person. now we're getting into those practical strategies. What can you actually do in the classroom? Is it restorative justice practices, which a lot of people think, great, you can do that in K through 12 education, but you can't do that in preschool. That is
Yes,
inaccurate. You can definitely do. You have to you shift it to make it more developmentally appropriate, obviously, but it is 100% possible to use restorative justice in the classroom. It is 100% possible to use culturally affirming and responsive and relevant pedagogy in the preschool classroom, right?
Absolutely.
So all of these things help to mitigate some of those exclusionary discipline practices, which at school it looks like suspensions and expulsions. And you're looking at the students who are mostly being subjected to this, and that looks like our students of color, primarily Black boys, are subjected to suspension and expulsion. A lot of students with disabilities are subjected to suspensions and expulsions at the disproportionate, right? So with Black children, their total population is somewhere around like 18% of the total preschool population, but the amount of them being suspended at least once or more than once is like double that. It's about like 48% of these students that are being suspended from school. And like that's what I mean when I'm talking about exclusionary discipline. It pushes students outside of the classroom and pushes them, outside of the community. And so thinking about what is that communicating to those students? What is it communicating to those students that are being subjected to this? What is it communicating to their families? And what is it communicating to the students in the classroom who are witnessing this? Right. So you're seeing these Black boys being pushed out of school over and over and over again. So what are the assumptions that you now are going to be making when you're seeing that over and over again in the classroom? So, the data is there that shows us that this is happening. You have people with lived experience telling us that this is happening. And so it's time for us to listen. It's time for us to start changing our practices. And it's time for us to start being open to learning and staying curious about how can we best create learning environments that are wholly inclusive for every child.
Yes, no, and that all of that is great. And I think the key piece that you mentioned is like the humanity side of it. And I think this is in a world where we are very desensitized to so much that happens around us, just from the graphics we can see, just from your everyday, movie in the theater, like, watching someone's head get chopped off is nothing to us now. It's just every day, like, oh, it's a movie, you know what I mean? Like, but not to get away from the point. The point being is we are not, so many things are very passive in the world of education. A lot of, because, people are looking at it as approach, well, this is just something new that I need to learn, or this is something I need to add to my plate, instead of thinking it from the approach of, am I actually a teacher who actually is being mindful within my classroom of the multiple different students that I have that do not come from the same street. They're all coming from different places. And even if they are on the same street, every house is not the same. Just to really sit back and think about that, and understand that my lived experience is not your lived experience. And just because if we are the same skin tone doesn't mean we've had the same experience either. There's so many things that go into it. And I know that there's such a huge debate on, critical race theory or cultural responsiveness. And it's a whole kind of, now it's like a double-edged sword, where it's like reverse racism, like we're now, and I explained this to you, that I'm being called racist now because I'm having these conversations. And it's interesting when you like think about it, like, is it such a hard task to ask for you to treat everybody equally, regardless? And it is crazy to me. And I've had a friend who shared, and with me, that her son within kindergarten, first grade, was kicked out of every place he was in because he had sensory issues, and he is autistic, and he's constantly kicked out of school. So what does that tell us? What, he's not accepted in society, like he's not accepted in this place to learn. If a kid makes a mistake, or if they fight at school, you're going to push them out for weeks at a time, so they're not getting their education, instead of helping them remediate, maybe a little bit of anger management at school, like something, like, you know what I mean? And so these topics are such a huge issue in school, where, and we said this last time, it's like, why why are we just, we obviously are addressing the concerns over and over again, but
Mhm.
what are we actually doing to I don't even want
Yeah.
to say fix. It's not even fixing. It's just do it. Do the right thing
Yeah.
by these people, by the children that you're serving, the families that you're serving. And I definitely
Mhm.
advocate for any of you that are even interested in going into education. You need to understand whatever school district you're living in, and it's not even by district. What school are you going
Mhm.
into? Do you understand that population in that district? Do you understand the things
Mm.
that they go through in that district or in within that community? And do you understand even from the point of view? And if you don't, this is where you
Yeah.
need to take the time. Don't worry about academics your first couple weeks of school. Talk to
Mhm.
your kids, learn them, learn about them and their families
Yes.
and so many things, because so many people are just definitely misunderstood because we as people don't take the time to understand why they are the way they are. And I know that's like, it seems
Mm.
like such a big ask, especially in a world like education where it's like, okay, we have testing here, we have to do this here,
Yep.
we're on a field trip here, like there's never no time. But I think we kind
Mhm.
of we waste time when we're sitting here trying to remediate and go backwards on behavior, when if we actually just literally take this time to learn about each other as adults, as learn of our
Yeah.
families, like it could be so much. And that's like that human side of it, I feel
Mm.
is always missing, because like again, schools, another thing, it's a money thing. I don't like that.
Yeah.
It's a politic
No.
thing. I don't. Why are we playing with people's kids and people's lives? And honestly, if you really think
Mhm.
about it, and this is where, for me, I struggle to get, some of our parents who may not, have even had the best experience in school, and they're just like, oh, that's no different from when I was in school. And sorry, I just see. I'm making sure I'm okay because I see that my internet's not stable. Okay, there it goes. Sorry. I just
Uh-oh.
wanted to make sure
Okay.
it didn't
We're
cut
back.
out
We're
on me.
back.
Okay. Did it cut out on me?
Cut out a little bit there.
Okay. Sorry, guys. And so, just want to make sure that, again, we're really taking education from a humanistic approach, because again, we're all human. Like kids make
Mhm.
mistakes, adults make mistakes. Like we can't
Yep.
sit here and
Yep.
traumatize these kids for their bad behaviors, and then without context of why did they do what they did, or where is their learned behaviors
Mhm.
coming from. And so again, as advocating and encouraging our parents, like parents, we have to do better. And if we are a root issue, like how are we in within our households? How do we speak to our children? How do you talk to
Yes.
your children in relation to being respectful towards other adults? And things like
Mm.
this. It's so many ways that we can talk through it. And I think one of the biggest
Yeah.
pieces too, of which I'm going to provide some data before we get into our next topic, is all of this is related to the school to prison pipeline. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's not real. And we kind of go through these debates, but it's very real. Do your
I wish it
research,
wasn't.
people. Yes, it is very
Yeah.
real. And again, like you said, things and it could be, that it's not the current people in place now, and this is not their idea, but the systematic racism,
Mhm.
systematic injustices that we see within education
Yes.
alone. And we're not just talking to Black students, we're talking about, a wide range of students, and how just things are always disproportionate, right? Because you think about it, if
Mhm.
all of our kids are in the same school, should not every child be performing similarly? Like, you know what I mean?
Mm.
So why is
Yep.
it always by demographic are we seeing such a huge separation in the data and what's there? And
Yes.
obviously there's something that plays into it. And of course, home is a big component. And so again, I advocate for parents to
Mhm.
step up and take charge of what they're supposed to be doing as parents. But
Mhm. Mhm.
schools, we got to stop doing this. So the school prison to prison pipeline, just to give you a couple of quick quotes, and I'll tag this in our comments below. But if we're looking at something like zero tolerance, so if your school has a zero tolerance policy for no fighting, no
Mhm.
cigarettes, no something, of the sort, that automatically they're either suspended or expelled, right? And it could be a first offense,
Mhm.
all of those things. So typically, in a study that we're showing is that it says that zero tolerance disciplines has resulted in Black students facing disproportionately harsher punishments than their white peers in public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see that in typical public school enrollment, on an average, that you'll have 51% students are white, and then 16% are Black students in this study. But when we're talking about multiple suspensions, you'll notice that for the same suspension case, like they both Black and white did the
Mm-hmm.
same, they fought, right? The same two students
Yep.
fighting each other. Sometimes you'll see that the
Yep.
Black student is 42% likely to have multiple suspensions versus the white student having 31% for the same type of infraction at school, right? And it
Yes.
also says that Black students represent 31% of school-related arrests. So that also brings in the topic of having SROs, or student resource
Mm-hmm.
officers in schools. I don't know if I want to get in that topic today, but I think
That's
in certain instances, like I've seen a great SRO in my high school that I used to teach at, and he was wonderful with our high school students and really related very well. But he also came from the community, and really had the effort of not getting these kids in trouble and really working through some strategies with these kids, versus some that are literally fighting the children in the school, and
yeah.
then they're getting kicked out, and like because of them. And so I kind of have I feel like high school, sure, because of safety reasons, but I don't feel that we need to have police officers in an elementary or a middle school,
Okay.
because
No.
this is a behavior control issue. This isn't, we need to arrest these
Yeah.
kids. You know what I mean? And then the last,
Mm-hmm.
like really quick, is that it says that Black students are suspended and expelled 3 times more than white students. And then students that are
Mm-hmm.
suspended or expelled for discretionary violations are nearly 3 times more likely to be in contact with the juvenile justice system the following year. And so I'll post this stat in the chat for you guys. But there's so much research around this. And again, as Brittany
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, we're not just focusing on the Black children. This does represent many students of colors, but predominantly Hispanic and Black children, and then Black boys in particular in higher numbers. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's a whole thing. Like there's studies out there that showcase, like they do studies based off of state standardized testing and what do these third grade
Yep.
scores look like. And if you're in an area where your school's underperforming, well, you're probably going to be a higher state that's going to have a lot more incarcerated people. So now let's put money into jails instead of putting money into the schools to actually educate our kids. And so it's just,
Yeah.
these topics go on for days. And
Mm-hmm.
as you talked about systemic or system flaws, like it is a flaw. And I think we talked about in
Yeah.
our last conversation, I brought up did I bring up the meme about the ocean? I don't know if I
Oh
remember.
yes. Yes.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So real quick, so it's like this meme. The teacher, this guy, the guy that's mopping the ocean, right? And the meme
Mm-hmm.
says teachers trying to clean up the school system, and I was like, well, we need to leave this ocean. Like, we need something brand new. And I know so many people
Yes.
try different things. This is why charters come out. This is why, we have homeschooling. This is why, a lot of things. But at the end of the day, when we're looking overarching, it's all encompassed in our society. And I'll leave with this: is if you really got to think about it. If our kids are illiterate at this age, if we're fighting still the systemic issues between
Mm-hmm.
race in schools, and we are incarcerating people because fundamentally they're just not educated. That's kind of how I kind of look at it. Educated in
Mm-hmm.
multiple facets: social emotional learning, literacy. I could go on for days.
Yes.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna have issues, and I do fear for our society 20, 30 years ahead. These children currently are supposed to be the ones that are taking over for us in the future. And if we don't really advocate to make these changes, and people just getting out of your own way. This isn't about you personally as a person. This is, how are you treating everybody? How are we treating everybody? And being able for us to get what we need through for our kids. And so I think the work that you're doing is beautiful. I know, wow, we approached an hour already. So I know we touched on most of the things, but is there any thing like super like on your mind that maybe we didn't touch on today that you'd like to speak on before we go?
Yeah, when it comes to, I think we've touched on a lot on development, and I think within early childhood, so when you go beyond your 12 units in California, you learn a lot about the development of a child. You learn a lot about how the human brain develops. You learn a lot about lifespan development. So even beyond, early childhood and early childhood technically goes up to about age 8, which is, around 3rd grade.
Right.
And you kind of get into, that's kind of your late childhood. And then you get into adolescence, which is really at any point with the onset of puberty.
Yeah.
So that depends from person to person, right? So some kids might start as early as 3rd grade. Some kids might start, within like 6th grade.
Yeah.
Puberty starts when it starts
Yeah.
for whoever it is. And so then you get your adolescent development. And I think what's really important to notice that with all this data that you're putting out there, right, is how is this developmentally appropriate, right? And it does go back to looking at what I talked about in my master's thesis about if we connect our understanding on adolescent development and human development in general and brain development, if we're connecting all of these things together, then the practices that we're doing, they don't make sense. Right. And so we can see that from the data that it doesn't make sense, that it's not helpful, that it's not actually supporting children, that it's not supporting students' health and well-being. It's not making schools any safer. It's not increasing academic success, right? It's being detrimental to everyone involved. It's detrimental to the students who are being subjected to the exclusionary discipline. And it's detrimental to the students who are witnessing this as well.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no benefit to punitive practices or exclusionary discipline. There really isn't a benefit whatsoever. It only harms students.
Right.
And you think of it even from like a purely brain development sense, right? So I know I said that our brains reach the size it will be by about 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
But it keeps on developing.
Right.
And one really fascinating thing that I've been really just learning about with the human brain is that it develops from the least complex to the most complex. So if you look at, I'm making a little fist here. So if you look at this, and this is your brain stem is just like down here, and it is basically I call it the lizard brain. All it wants to do is survive. Right. So, and it makes sense that that's the first part of your brain that develops because you need to know how to breathe. You need your blood to be like pumping all that good oxygenated blood everywhere. Right. So like that's where your kind of brain stem, like that's what it controls. So when you're in utero and when you're first born, like this is the part of your brain that is pretty well developed because it's the least complex. It has a lot of really important things in it. So I'm not saying it's not important, but in terms of how our brains function, it's not the most complex in terms of development. Second, after that, you have your kind of midbrain, which has your memory center. It has social emotional kind of learning and everything in there. So it's another really important part of your brain. And so as you're looking at early childhood, that's a really big part of your brain that is developing. And so as early childhood educators and teachers, that's really what we're focusing on. We're focusing on social emotional learning. We're focusing on cognitive development, where we're focusing on that aspect where it's really controlled by that midbrain, because it's the thing that is actively developing right now.
Right.
The final thing to develop is the kind of prefrontal cortex, or just kind of like this big, and it's the biggest part of your brain. It's the whole kind of cap that goes on top of that, right? And that develops at the end of adolescence. So that adolescence starts around puberty. It ends, we want to say, around kind of your mid-20s is when your brain will actually, cease its kind of functional development. You're still learning things after that.
Right.
But your brain has now kind of reached full maturity, and like you have access to all of the tools, right? If you've been working on that. And that's, again, a big part of our role as educators is to give students the resources and the tools, right?
Yes.
They're practicing that. So in early childhood, their brain is developing their social emotional skills. So we need to give them the strategies, the tools, the opportunities to practice that, right? They're basically learning how to be people, and that is our job, right? So I personally don't place a whole big lot of focus on, super academics in early childhood.
Right.
Because what I want to focus on is that part of your brain that is actively learning, is actively growing. I want to give you the tools to practice. I want to give you the opportunities to practice that. How do you play with other people? How do you recognize that someone is upset? How do you recognize how your actions are impacting the total community around you, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you recognize your own emotions? And
Mm-hmm.
what do you do when you have big emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a teacher who's going to tell, a 2, 3, 4-year-old, like, oh, don't cry, don't be a baby, don't be a girl. Like, no, like, you're allowed to have feelings. There's no such thing as a bad feeling.
Right.
You just need to know what to do with it, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so that's my goal. I'm trying to show you what to do with those big emotions.
Yeah.
And so when we think about adolescence and that kind of prefrontal cortex, there's some really big, super complex things that are developing in that brain area, right?
Yeah.
Such as impulse control. That's developing.
Yeah.
Right?
I have 11-year-old. Believe me, I know.
Yes. And so as children grow up and as they are developing and again practicing this skill over time, they will get better at controlling their impulses. But we do know that in kind of that early adolescence, when we're teenagers, our brain is just wired for pleasure. We want to do things that feel good, and we're not really thinking about consequences. We're not really thinking about our futures that much. We're not really thinking about all these other things. We're thinking of, this feels good right now, so I'm gonna do it, right?
Right.
And they're practicing those skills. They're practicing impulse control. They're practicing their critical thinking, which is also housed in that kind of prefrontal cortex. These are all things that they are practicing so that later in life, once they have a brain that is fully matured, grown, and developed, that they can now utilize all these tools that they've been practicing.
Yep.
And sometimes we forget that students are practicing these skills.
Yes.
And that they're not going to get it 100% of the time.
Yes.
Because they're not supposed to. Their brain is not developed to do that.
Exactly.
Their brain might be really good at doing the thing one day, and the next day, maybe they didn't get enough sleep. Maybe they didn't eat enough. Maybe they didn't get enough protein. So many things could have happened to throw them off that now you have a student who might be, really hyperactive in class or might be having really difficult and challenging behaviors. Yeah. And don't even get me started on how trauma impacts the brain. That's a whole other podcast right there.
Definitely.
You add in trauma, you add in community-based violence, you add in all these other factors that have a negative impact on our total brain and development, that we forget that students are going through this and their brain's not fully formed.
Right.
So when children and adolescents and teenagers, when they're doing things that, are challenging behaviors or things that are really annoying or things that are dangerous, I think we just forget that that's what they are supposed to do.
Yes.
It's developmentally appropriate. They're practicing, they're learning.
Yes.
And that is our role. Like at the base of it, like that is what we're trying to get people to understand, that they're going to do these things.
Right.
Is it annoying? Yes. Do you think I like having to say things over and over and over and over and over again? No, I don't love it. But that's how they're learning. And that's how they're practicing.
Yeah. But punishing is not the answer.
It's not the answer.
Taking away their education.
That's what their brain is doing.
Yeah. Kicking them out. Oh, now you don't get to learn for a week. So sorry. Like, you know what I mean? So sorry. I don't mean to sound so nonchalant about it, but and I think,
it's what's happening.
It's what happens over and over and over again. I definitely feel that there, unless there's a physical threat or, things like that, that gets a little teetered. But when we're talking about general, like, oh, Johnny was just so distracting today. Well, I'm sorry. Did you give Johnny what he needed to not be distracted? Like, that's my question to you. Like, of course he's distracted. Here? Yes. Like, how did you talk to him through it? Or did you just tell him to stop and he didn't stop? And, and so, we can go on forever for this. And I think, just the big, key pieces out of our conversation for today is, definitely, we just gotta take for even with the younger, it's like I like to think, and this is how I was when I was teaching, is like, and how I am as a parent, is I put myself in that age, like how was I and what was I doing as a child, at that age range. I have a really weird, I can go back probably to 5 years old and like a lot of memories, and a lot do stem from school too. And you know, I kind of like even look at my daughter, like, you know, she did some stuff with technology I didn't like the other day. And, you know, it's a learning curve. Like, and, you know, we're in the age of technology. I'm not going to sit here and scream and yell at her over something. I'm just going to have a conversation, take it away. It's a learning, tool, like to have this discussion. But the same, like within our schools, you know, we're playing a very dangerous line when it's really us as adults that can't handle certain things, because one, we are not regulating our own emotions, or we're not prepared for the field of work that we're in, because this job is not for the weak. I'm so sorry. Like, you have to be strong to be in these places. And not saying you're warranted to be disrespected by children. No. And I know that's another topic, but we still have to be able to remediate some things without just, no, you got to go, like kicking them out, like, because we're not doing anybody any good with doing this, overall. Well, I want to be sure, we definitely probably got to get on another conversation, because I know I mean, you could go for days, but thank you to everybody who is watching tonight, or today, whatever time it is that it is you're watching it. And thank you, Brittany, so much for joining me. So again, you guys can find Brittany on Instagram at conscious.pathways. That's where we connected. Where else are you on, if for people to kind of connect with you at?
Yes. So I'm on YouTube as well. So that's just Conscious Pathways. So you can, you know, check in with me there. I'm also on LinkedIn at Brittany Carey. So if you want to see what I'm talking about there, I'm usually talking a little bit more like research based and like sharing articles. And so I'm getting a little bit more technical over there. But if you just want to see my, you know, social media stuff, Instagram is probably the best way. I haven't really done too much on the TikTok frontier. That app scares me.
No, but I don't do it.
I'm on there. I'm working on getting over my fear of TikTok. But as of right now, it's wild, wild west over there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. No, I don't, TikTok is not my place, so I'm not going to be there. So I guess I'm just going to not be in that world. That's okay. You guys feel free to share my stuff there, but thank you. So please be sure to like, follow, and share myself, Kylie Elizabeth, the virtual educator, and Brittany Carey at Conscious Pathways. And you guys all have a great night. Thank you so much, Brittany.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.